Hi, I'm Benjie Messer, UUCP's music director. I use he/him pronouns. I've been asked to talk about the history of music at the UU congregation of Phoenix and how it relates to stewardship. To do this, I referred to the History of UUCP 1947 through 2017, written by the congregation's archivist, Charlotte Carl Mitchell. Thank you, Charlotte, for making our history accessible. There are no records about music during the 1940s and 50s at UUCP, before the congregation moved into their current building on Lincoln Drive. We assume they sang hymns and featured music in services, but we don't know. Our current building was completed in 1961, and the next decade was a rich time for the arts at UUCP. We had a jazz and poetry series, a youth string orchestra, Gene Grigsby organized regular art shows, John Waddell's statues arrived, jazz pianist Charles Lewis performed here regularly. 1975 was the first year that UUCP had a choir that rehearsed weekly for the program year. It was organized by Una Sykes, later Una Boppart, and during services, the choir sang in the sanctuary loft, which is now used by our audiovisual team. The choir hasn't skipped a year since, so it's a very long-running small group. Some who sang with the choir in the 1980s are still singing with us today. Una also began the musical talent show and fundraiser known as Cabaret, which continued every spring at UUCP until 2014. Many musicians have found a home at UUCP, including many composers. In 1976, Ed Grobe wrote a cantata, Princess Unitaria, which was performed both at UUCP and at that year's General Assembly. Both Ed and Jerry Whalen wrote many pieces for our services, and those pieces are still in our choir library. In 1997, Connie Yarmarkt, then Connie Clemens, joined as pianist and soon after became our music director. Connie raised the congregation's level as a singing congregation through continual refinement of her own song leading and by leading many workshops and services about hymn singing. She also led the congregation in some major musical performances, including one of the first performances of the UU cantata, Sources. Connie took musical leadership in the larger faith, too. When the UUA began a program to certify music leaders, she was one of the first musicians to complete it. She was the pianist for General Assembly when it was in Phoenix. And speaking of composer members, both Connie and myself have contributed many arrangements to our choir library. So when I was hired in 2013, I found a choir that was proud of their many accomplishments. I found member musicians who were leading small groups, and I found a few members who organized full musical services once each year. I also found a congregation that expected exciting, varied music every Sunday. And I joined a staff team that expected professionalism. It was part of my agreement letter that I attend the UU Musicians Network annual conference each year to stay aware of best musical practices in the faith. And I had enough professional development funding to do that, which most of my colleagues do not. Because of that history and that support, I've had the chance to take musical leadership in our faith myself. I've been certified as a UU music leader by the UUA. I was the music director for the first online General Assembly in 2020. And during our lockdown year of only meeting online, I led a video choir that involved UU singers from around the state and beyond. The videos we created are still used by congregations around the country. As recently as this last December, I was getting emails from congregations who were shutting down on Christmas Eve because of blizzards, asking if they could use our videos. To bring this around to stewardship, let me end by saying that I'm very aware of this musical history when I write my budget request each year. For example, to continue having a choir that sings exciting, varied anthems, we need a budget for a pianist, and we need a budget for new sheet music. I did not have a budget for a pianist this year. That was one of the things that was cut last year when our budget came up short. You probably hardly noticed because Connie Yarmarkt has stayed connected to the congregation and offered to accompany the choir this year on a volunteer basis. But that arrangement is not sustainable. And while we have a wonderful choral library, musical styles change, and the worship topics that I need to illustrate change. And so we need to buy new music occasionally. Today, we performed a piece in Arabic that references the Palestinian struggle for a service about drawing liberation wisdom from Islam. Before I purchased that piece, which was published fairly recently, there was nothing in our library that would have fit both the theme of today's service and the abilities of our choir. So, thank you for your support of the UU Congregation of Phoenix and of its music program.